Hey dear, Zimzi here, and it is officially summer, and I've been reading some dark fiction lately that are quite memorable, and I just want to talk about them. So let's dive in. Okay, first we have the latest novella from Eric LaRocca, and in case you don't know who Eric LaRocca is, he is an indie splatterpunk author, meaning that he uses dark, transgressive themes, but he writes it in this really poetic, beautiful style. Kind of almost think of his writing style kind of along the lines of Clive Barker, so that's what you have in store here. So his latest novella is called We Can Never Leave This Place. The story follows an imaginative teenage girl named Mara who lives in a war-torn country, and she's reeling from the recent death of her father. However, this giant spider shows up at her doorstep and offers her and her mother protection. Her mother accepts because she's vulnerable, she's pregnant, and she wants someone to protect them. However, Mara begins to suspect their new guest. I definitely feel like this story is an allegory for how we remember trauma, how our memories can be warped, and it almost reminds you kind of like Pan's Labyrinth or Beasts of the Southern Wild, where there's this young girl trying to process this hurricane and she imagines all these wild animals. And this story is very fantastical. Like, Mara begins to imagine, or they are actually like that all the looters like around her house are vermin as well. Literally, they're described as vermin, kind of like in Kafka's Metamorphosis. But even though there's this fantasy element, the story is really grounded by the relationship between the mother and the daughter. They have this very frayed relationship, years and years of pent-up resentment, and because they're kind of like holed up in this home trying to protect themselves, like their emotions are at a breaking point and it just comes to a boil, and that is what I find so compelling and realistic. I gotta say, I feel like this work is my favorite of LaRocca's so far. It has this very human family drama going on, but there's these bizarre, surreal elements as well, and I just absolutely adored it. And I do have to give special thanks to the author, who was very kind enough to provide me with a review copy. Okay, next we have Juniper Thorn by Reid, and I have previously reviewed her first book, her debut, which is The Wolf and the Woodsman, and I absolutely adored it. I gave it 5 stars, and this book is actually a standalone set in the same universe in a future timeline. So this is set in the future where there's this technology boom and magic is becoming obsolete. And I do want to point out that this is a much darker book than her first one. So this one is a loose retelling of the Brothers Grimm, The Juniper Tree, and it follows 3 sisters who are witches, and they are stuck in a house with their wizard father, who is very hyper controlling. He's very strict, and they provide services to curious visitors. They like help with ailments, and one of them can divine the future. However, they are getting less and less visitors because the city around them is changing. This is like an industrial boom, and people are becoming more interested in science and technology and electricity and spectacles like the ballet. So they are becoming very poor and starving. So these girls are trying to find a way to survive. First off, I do appreciate that this is a beautiful and unflinching portrayal of trauma based off of the author's own experience, and it feels like a very personal and intimate story. And with that in mind, this story does explore dark themes, and I saw some people like giving it 1-star reviews because they were so disgusted or they DNF'd it. So with that in mind, read the trigger warnings if you have to. I know there were 2 scenes that really got to me and like made me cringe, not like, oh, that's embarrassing. No, like I felt sympathetic pain and I was going, oh, that has to hurt, and it involved, I'll just say, an unusual use of gardening shears. However, I do feel like the plot had structural issues. It felt a bit meandering, especially towards the beginning. Like, this isn't a spoiler because it's in the official blurb, but there is also a serial killer on the loose, and I feel like some of the more intense subplots should have been integrated more throughout the story to create more tension, because mostly it's very atmospheric about her in this very dingy house and her garden. Overall, I do think it's a worthwhile read if you are looking for a dark fairy tale. However, I just didn't find it as compelling as The Wolf and the Woodsman because I connected more with the characters in that one. Okay, last but not least, we have my first Ottessa Moshfegh novel, and it's called Lapvona, and it's set in this quasi-medieval made-up town called Lapvona, hence the title, where there are villagers who are starving and their crops are failing because their lord is a terrible, corrupt man who is hoarding their water. I went into this book wanting to love it so badly. Like, when I saw the trailer, I was so on board, and in case you haven't seen the trailer, it's almost this deep-fried, surrealist shitpost video, and it has almost this ominous, surreal, bizarre, uncanny quality, and I was hoping for that tone in this book, but the book itself was kind of boring to me and underwhelming. It goes through the different farming seasons, and I wish it had leaned more into the absurdism and more into the mysticism. Like, there's this wise woman who basically is an herbalist. There's also this one character who's a shepherd boy, and he talks about sheep a lot. He calls himself a Lamb of God, and I almost wish that the story had gone a step further and had drawn more parallels between him and the sheep, like calling himself Jesus, the Lamb of God, the sacrificial lamb, which is on the cover. I wish it had developed its own themes more. It felt almost like an earlier draft, like especially in the beginning parts there were a lot of structural paragraph issues. Like, there'd be one long winding paragraph and there'd be a sentence tacked on at the very end that didn't really smoothly relate to the previous sentence, so I would have just worked on the flow of her writing. Alright, those are all I have to say about those books. If you've read anything interesting lately, let me know down in the comments below. And as a heads up, I am planning to read a whole bunch of gothic horror that I'm super excited about next month, so you have that to look forward to. As always, thank you for watching and see ya!